Eskom. Now, it reportedly has exorbitant debt that amounts to 419 billion rand. The power utility is not selling enough power to cover its costs. It has been reported that the struggling power utility wants government take on about 100 billion rand of its debt as part of a rescue plan. So Tito Mboweni, the Minister of Finance, has recently said that Eskom should go to the bond markets for funds instead of seeking bailouts from the state. Morning Live extended an invitation to Eskom to talk about the report, but they unfortunately declined, saying they are currently in discussion with critical stakeholders. We've got with us in studio Economist Xhanti Payi, who is going to help us unravel a little bit of the problem at Eskom, if that's at all possible. But it's good to have you here in studio. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, you know, Eskom, the real problem child of South Africa, and a very bad problem, because when we're sitting with $419 billion of debt, where do you begin to try and get out of something like that?
Look, I think for a while it looked like, I think at the beginning of this year, the new board had sort of looked like they were dealing quite well with the finances of Eskom. Part of that is obviously guaranteed also by the government. I think the government guarantees about 350 billion of that. But sadly, the guarantee itself doesn't actually pay the finance cost or the interest on the debt. So while you may guarantee that if Eskom defaults or is unable to pay, you'll pay, you don't actually continue to pay. So I think that's the major problem. And as we said, they're just not making enough actually to meet all the obligations.
Yeah. So we've got the finance minister who comes and suggests that Eskom go to the bond markets for funds instead of seeking bailouts from the state. I mean, is that an option? What do you think of that?
I don't think that's an option, because I think the whole reason they are actually asking government to take some of that debt is because they are finding it very difficult to go borrow in the markets. And in any case, if you borrow and you are not able to pay back, that puts you in even a worse space. Because I think their big problem now is whether or not they can continue to finance the debt rather than actually be able to borrow more. So I think that's their biggest problem.
Can you explain to us about the bonds? Because, I mean, as far as I understand, it's a very expensive exercise selling bonds. How does it actually work for the layman on the street? I mean, we don't understand these things.
So basically, there's different kinds of debt. So you can actually go and get a plain loan. So a bank just gives you 500,000 or 500 million or 5 billion. Or you go into the bond market, so basically where you issue almost what they would call a piece of paper. Basically, a bond is a piece of paper. So you say to someone, listen, I'll give you this piece of paper, I'll take it back on a certain year, but before I take it back, I will give you certain fixed amounts of payments until such a time as it matures, so until such time as I'm ready to actually pay it back. And that's a much more easier way, because bonds can be traded over a period of time and you can roll them over. It's a much more easier way of actually taking on debt. So in terms of actually, in much different than actually going to find a bank that's going to lend you that much money. Yeah. And we're actually able to actually divide it amongst a number of investors rather than just the one big bank that may be able to take it. So
I'm going to come out directly and ask you, what do you think the solution for Eskom is?
Look, I mean, I think the most unpalatable one is actually that Eskom gets what Pravin Gordhan, when he was Minister of Finance, talked about this idea of a strategic partner. There is actually no other way that actually makes any sense.
When you say strategic partner, is that the path to privatization, in other words?
And I don't think you actually have to privatize the entire thing, right? You can get a strategic partner, much like the government did with Telkom. And Telkom is an extremely successful business, and it continues to meet the strategic obligations of government, continues to, provide telecommunications, infrastructure for telecommunications in South Africa, and it's probably getting, is the cheapest, I think, even with data. So you can actually allow a partner that will allow to actually an injection of cash into Eskom, and probably would help with some efficiencies as well. So it might be something that we really need to consider. Yeah. But of course, politically, it's not something that the government is willing to go to.
It certainly isn't. And we're also sitting in an election year next year, 2019. You've also got unions that are stepping up when Eskom comes in and gives a plan of trying to withhold salaries, retrench staff, try and cut costs, but unions will not allow that. You've also got government that are saying, hang on, we'll do what we have to save you, but it's clearly not enough. Then the Chinese come in. And I want to just focus a little bit on the Chinese loan. We got if I'm not mistaken, it was a 33 billion rand loan from the Chinese Development Bank. We still don't understand the conditions that come with this loan. Is it a good thing to start asking the Chinese to step in and help?
Well, I mean, whoever can give us some money, I think we're going to have to take it. It depends, as you say, it depends on the terms of that loan. We'd like to think the Chinese are our friend, right? They are a BRICS partner, and they've said that they are willing to, to help us wherever they can. So I think in some ways, but I suspect also the Chinese will look for some guarantees in terms of when they give us a loan, which all falls back into the government. So I suspect whoever is liquid enough, whoever can give us favorable terms, we should be taking it at this stage.
Do you really agree with that? I mean, if we take our neighbors, Zambia, who also got loans for their power utility from the Chinese, then they started defaulting on the payments. There's very little transparency when the Chinese come in and start rescuing state entities. And now there's talk of the fact that the Chinese may be taking over the power utility of Zambia, just like they have, according to reports coming out of Zambia, taken over the Zambian public broadcaster because they're defaulting on payments. So whether the Chinese are our friends or not, I am very, very skeptical of this.
Sure. I mean, I think the Chinese are getting a bad rep on the continent. I suppose the Zambian story is one that's actually quite horrific, if you think about it. But part of it is exactly the terms of the loan. I think when you actually, borrow money, when you mortgage a power utility, you actually don't intend to let it sink. And I think actually part of it is actually perhaps how that whole situation was managed and actually that relationship as well. I think in a way, if you look at a situation where you actually have to now hand it over, it suggests even the way it was structured, the thinking, and even actually how broke the government would have to be to actually allow such a thing to happen. I think there's a lot more behind that story than actually what Mr. I.
How did we get here, Xhanti? I mean, so many people want to point fingers all over the place. I know that we were warned all the way back in 1998 that this was going to happen. These calls were ignored. Then we started on this word we'd never heard of called load shedding and blackouts, and the country went through this running up to the 2010 World Cup, and it just carried on and on and on. Then the Guptas got involved and coal started. The quality of the coal wasn't good enough. We've been given a lot of excuses, but from your interpretation of all of this, how have we gotten to this point?
Look, I mean, it seems that Eskom has been a very inefficient operation. I think people will talk about how expensive they've paid for coal at times when they should be paying much less for coal. So I think that has been one thing. So paying a higher price and therefore having to carry then that price because obviously you can't at the same time increase the revenue. So that's been one thing. The second thing is, of course, everybody keeps saying that, Eskom has a lot of staff and that it has to actually restructure its operations and perhaps it doesn't need as many people, and that actually even the cost of the staff at Eskom, as some would argue, is quite high. And then, of course, there's been a lot of leakages in the system, as everybody has also talked about. And I think the last thing is that Eskom is not actually being able to cost properly and also actually to regain their revenue. I mean, if we heard the stories about how much they are owned by municipalities.
It's a problem.
And that money from the municipality is going to be very difficult to actually get because those municipalities are owned themselves by their clients, which are consumers, the ordinary people. And ordinary people are going through some rough times. And so it's very difficult to imagine that money is recuperable in the short term to be able to help Eskom. So they've got multiple problems, and so they need actually a strategy that allows them to wade through every single problem.
Do we have the right leadership in place now?
Well, I mean, that's what it looked like. I mean, I think the board, as was chosen at the beginning of the year, and of course the new management. So it seems that they've got the right kind of people. And hopefully these are the right kind, not just the right kind of people, but people who will stay the course through the restructure. They will get the right kind of support from the government. And that also international markets will, and that also consumers, that we will also give them some support. So it's going to take a huge effort. But as I say, they're going to have to take some very, very tough decisions, even decisions that are unpalatable, as is, retrenchments, as is even thinking about a strategic partner. Because if we don't take the tough decisions, everything will continue to stay this
And
way.
we're sitting in load shedding now, which is a major problem. What do you believe is behind load shedding? Because we're always told that it's the shortage of coal, it's this, it's that. I can't even go through the list of excuses they keep given to us. But the reality is that then you see reports that there's an oversupply of coal. And at one point, we had the finance minister, Malusi Gigaba, telling us we've actually got an oversupply of power and we're absolutely fine.
Sure.
A couple of months later, businesses are now back on their knees because we are having load shedding every single day.
And that's what we were told. Remember also, there was also this idea of renewable energy.
Yes.
Not needed. All those projects, Eskom said we don't need any of that. We've got excess supply.
Excess supply. That's
what
all
they
I
said.
ever remember.
And
we
we
were
understood
like, wow,
that was the case. And so that's quite interesting, actually. And also remember, there were also these new power projects that were signed, renewable power projects that were signed by the Minister of Energy. And we would have thought that some of those would have come on stream because a lot of people actually invested in these things, and we would have thought that that is also going to be able to help. So it's very, very difficult to understand what is actually happening in Eskom. One of the big things now they're saying is that they haven't had a lot of investment into servicing the power stations. And they're saying that that's the main thing, that these power stations keep breaking because they don't have money to service them. They've been postponing and postponing servicing them. But that also is not something that they talked about a few months ago. They didn't mention that at all, that actually they were out of money that they couldn't service. It's now suddenly a new thing that actually we are here. So, I think there's a lot of transparency that's lacking at Eskom.
Yeah. Madupi and Kusile. Those two words. We've spent a lot of money on them, and we're nowhere. Where are we with them?
Yeah. Look, I think we've got to face the idea that, we need a really stronger mix of energy. We need to actually decentralize energy. We need to make sure that we take the renewables, whether it's wind, whether it's solar power, because we are not, and also to allow a process in which actually, households themselves can actually generate their own energy. Because otherwise we are going to be stuck in this for a long, long time, because it's no longer efficient to think about producing energy in such faraway places and then having it to transmit it from, say, the Northern Cape all the way to the Eastern Cape. This has been also quite wasteful because a lot of energy gets lost in transmission. So we need to actually really rethink the way we produce energy in this country and also to modernize. I mean, many other countries, I understand we only produce 5% in renewables. Many other countries actually are far ahead of us.
Yeah.
So we need to actually think very strategically and move very, very fast. Otherwise, we're going to be in this for a long, long time. And it's not good for the economy at all.
Problem is we keep talking about we need to move very, very fast, but we don't appear to be moving fast. And just as we wrap up and go to the news, how bad is this going to be on our economy? Because this is what's been talking about, is the fact that if we are ever going to get out of, downgrading, I know we're all celebrating the fact that we're out of recession, but that could be very short-lived if Eskom is the way it is, because Eskom is our biggest threat at the moment. How bad is it for the economy?
I think it's particularly for the, for the small economy, for small and medium enterprises, these people who don't have generators. If you think about somebody who runs a butchery in the township, who uses that butchery, for example, to run a chisanyama, and they all must have a fridge. If the whole day they don't have power, their meat is actually rotting and they may be out of business because they're not a business that has a lot of capital. This is also true if we think about people who run even hair salons. If you don't have power in a hair salon, you actually make no business. So, and these are the businesses that we say, if the small businesses and informal businesses are the way forward in which we can actually create jobs and ordinary people can create jobs and hire other people. And so when we're actually unable to supply them with power, then we are actually, selling a bad story to them.
Finally, conspiracy theories. Are we being sabotaged? Because some people do not believe that we're in this situation.
The last time we were here, there was a lot of the talk about that we are actually being sabotaged. I mean, for myself, I think there's a little bit of sabotage because it really makes very, very little sense. When we were last here, we found out actually that we didn't need as much coal and actually we were being sabotaged. All the load shedding was certain people making tons of money this way or that. I wouldn't put it.
You wouldn't be surprised if we are being sabotaged. Okay, let's leave it there on quite an interesting note. Xhanti Payi, an economist, talking to us about the problems at Eskom, how we got here, where do we go from here, and are we being sabotaged? That's the major question, I think. All right, 7 o'clock on this Thursday morning. Let's get your news.